Oh, yeah, right.
Just once, I want to just do this. I want to sit down and shut up.
You're right.
Before planning, it was their own.
What? Remember, I didn't hear what.
The planning commission used to never have the,
I saw Casey use it once.
Yeah, he did.
no, but I mean, we used to not, like, when it came time for planning commission, they put it away.
It's too much power for planning commission.
Okay, I think I'm a pretty mellow
That's
person, but just one
irresponsible.
time I just like to go.
I think you should.
Oh,
If
shut up and
Go
sit
for it. No
down.
better time than the present.
you want, I can sit up there and do it.
Then we could just really.
That way
go
you
back.
like, it's not- you're not hurting.
That's right. Oh, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings ever.
We're all set up. I know we've
Okay.
got, I haven't heard from Heather or Heron, so I don't know if they're planning on making it. I'm not anticipating a lot of people coming, so we don't have any applications today, but we could get started and we
Okay,
could trickle in if you want.
let's get started then. Welcome to Planning Commission, June 2nd. We've asked Kenny to say a prayer and Jeff will give the pledge. So let's go from there. We'll do the pledge first and the prayer.
Right. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful that we can gather here in this North Logan Planning Commission meeting this evening. And we ask you to please guide us that we can make smart decisions that help our community and that we can be led to consider all sides of the items under consideration this evening, and that we can find ways to meet the needs of our citizens well on any side of these arguments. And we say this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We don't have an agenda. Oh, yes, we do have an agenda. So we need to adopt the agenda and a motion to adopt the agenda we need.
I move to adopt the agenda as listed here in tonight's agenda.
And a
I'll
second.
second it.
Thank you. It's been moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda has been adopted. No minutes to approve, right, Marie? Okay. And Spencer, we follow up on your last meeting?
Yeah.
wanna share?
So we had the workshop last week. Thanks for your input on that. We've got a couple items on here that are from that, and we'll go from there. And city council last night, the one item, the Smiling H subdivision, was approved in development plan by the city council. They had quite a bit of back and forth. They did get the plans up to where they needed to be, answered the questions. The one thing they're still planning on doing is having a open house at one of their newly constructed homes in Hyde Park. And that will be Monday from 3 to 6. The address and details, Alan sent out. I'm not sure if he included planning commissioners on that. If not, I'll get it copied and sent out to you that you can spread around if you have any neighbors that are concerned or just interested in asking questions about the subdivision directly to the developers.
And that's Olo Builders, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I just got a message that said not on YouTube, so.
Oh, we're not, are we? We should be on there.
We should.
It's from my wife.
We're amazed that somebody even wants to.
I think it's only fair if someone's gonna watch, we have to see that.
Right,
Yeah, that's
too.
right, turn your camera on.
It's running.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep, we are on YouTube. And somebody's watching. Yeah, that's the only follow-up. Is it Smiling H? Okay. Smiling H subdivision that was approved. And then I'll forward the details of that open house.
Okay, great.
When do they plan to start?
As soon as possible, their infrastructure, from what I've heard, they still got to do some final platting and approval. Our attorney will look at their plat and the language on it and make sure everything down to every word is right. So they've still got a little bit left, but I'm guessing they'll get started on infrastructure in the next month. They'll start on the south side of 2500 North. I think initially they want to do the north side. They won't be able to get across the canal with the sewer line because the canal's already on. So I think they're going to go on the south side to start.
Is that there, that alfalfa field between 6th East and 8th East?
Yes.
Or yeah. sure,
But this
right.
is the north side.
But on the,
Yeah.
yeah, so they're on the other side of the street, but.
Yep.
Okay.
So they'll be there.
Okay. All right, let's go to item number 1. Discussion about draft updates to North Logan City moderate income housing plan. Spencer?
Okay, so this is tagging on to our discussion at the workshop. I'll give a little bit of an overview on our moderate income housing plan and why we need to change it. So every city over a certain size is required to have a moderate income housing plan. We adopted ours in 2019 when it first became a requirement. And I have reported on that to the state every year since. We picked strategies and goals at that time. This past state legislative session, they updated the list of strategies and goals, added some new requirements. They specify you have to pick at least 3 from the list and 5 if you want priority consideration for a couple different funding mechanisms from state funds for transportation projects. In the workshop, we discussed keeping with the 3. Some wording changed, but essentially they were the same things, keeping with those same strategies we had. Another thing we had to do is add a timeline to each strategy. And this will be reported on by, I'll submit this to the Division of Workforce Services to give a report on how we're doing, and they'll be the ones that are checking to make sure the cities are following their plans. So it's quite a bit of oversight, quite a bit more than typical on city general plans, but it's the state code, and so we're trying our best to follow it. I'll go through the different goals that we have. We have 3, like I mentioned, and they are the ones we had before, just the wording's been updated. So one of them is rezone for densities necessary to facilitate the moderate income housing. Another one is the detached or accessory dwelling unit, internal or detached, zone for higher density or moderate income in commercial or mixed use zones. Those are the 3 that we've chosen. And I'll just go through each one individually here. Any questions on this before I dive into them a little bit deeper? Okay. So our rezoning for densities here necessary to facilitate the production of moderate income housing. It's a fairly subjective thing. I would argue that we've done that. We've had several RE1 zones have gone down to R115, little pockets that have gotten rezoned where it makes sense. And where we've gotten the good community feedback to do so. So I've left that kind of isolated areas of zoning with low density, kind of evaluating, looking at those, also evaluating applications as they come in and are submitted. I also have made sure to leave some wording on there that says, while considering other general plan items and factors.
Spencer, I'm sorry if you already touched on this. I have
Yes.
too many thoughts going at once.
No, go
but
ahead.
Do they provide a definitive meaning for moderate income housing?
No, not necessarily. We've
Okay.
got a lot of numbers in there that, because it varies from city to city. So we've got a lot of numbers that show what the median income house price is here, median income is, median housing. This plan's a lot bigger than just these goals and objectives. We had Bragg actually help us with all the numbers behind it. But we can't really control the price of things. So they don't expect us to put we'll have X amount of units at this price because we really have no say in that.
Okay, that makes sense.
So
Okay.
we just follow these strategies and kind of hope it will lead to that outcome. But as we know, everything's kind of expensive. As far as timeline on this, I tried to give some general timelines on things that I think made sense with our schedule. So applications could come in at any time, right? So that's always there. But as far as looking at the isolated areas of zoning, if we want to preemptively zone some areas, which may be good because we can kind of establish what we want it to be. If we take something from 1 acre and zone it to R115 ahead of the gate, then somebody comes in and asks about, say, multifamily. It's a lot easier for me to say, no, we already decided we wanted for that. We just rezoned it last year. That way we maybe avoid having somebody come in asking for townhomes and having a large definitive no every time somebody has to come in and ask. So I scheduled that for the first workshop. That could be a good thing to pop up as a discussion. And then through the rest of the year, when we have a lull in agenda items, we could look to rezone after, of course, talking to property owners and things like that in 2023. If we pick just a small area at a time, we have quite a bit of this land that we can work through. So this is an item we could have on our plan for quite a while, potentially. Any questions on this one, this rezoning?
Yeah, just a point of understanding. Is
Yes.
there a problem with saying no?
As far as saying no to a rezone?
Yeah.
No, nothing's
Okay.
changed as far as the
There was
state
an
code.
implication in your statement that made it
No.
sound like it's troubling to say no for some reason.
No. So yeah, no, you still have the same legislative ability to say no on that. So yeah, you don't have to. And I tried to word it where I threw in words like consider rezoning. I tried not to pin it down to say, hey, we will rezone X acres in X amount of years. And if we consider it, and I can have meeting agendas where I'm like, yeah, we discussed this item here. We had a public hearing here. We decided not to take that action. I feel like I still can report that to the Division of Workforce Services. And I think they'd be hard pressed to say we're not following our plan.
Right.
So
That's a comfortable.
kind of left that open.
Okay.
Okay, so the next goal, this one is the mixed use zones. So our previous strategies, we're talking about utilizing city center zone and kind of more the rezone, review zoning and commercial to include some of these zones and allow some residential development in our commercial. From our workshop and just the numbers we discussed, that didn't seem like a strategy we want to pursue right now, changing our commercial and adding residential density in there. One thing we did talk about is potentially modifying our existing mixed use zones to increase the residential density slightly. So I removed those first two where they'd be more rezoning, and this one would be more modifying those mixed use zones to maybe bump up the density in increments over time. The timeline on this, so we're not changing it with this plan, it's that we'll look at it. So the timeline with this, I also listed the beginning of the year. We discussed we've got a new well being drilled. We want to see what those numbers are before we do anything that would encourage growth if our water situation can't handle it. So after the well gets drilled, evaluate and determine if there's an appropriate density increase that could be met with that. And then from there, start the process. So that's kind of our timeline. Again, got wording like if deemed appropriate, factoring in water supply and increased demand, things like that. So we still have, as long as we get this on agendas next year and we do consider it and evaluate it and discuss it, and I have meeting minutes I can submit, again, I think there's not really much chance of being able to say we didn't do our plan, but we can also bump it up by small amounts. So right now it's 4 in the CCC zone. Maybe we change the code to go up to 6 or something. We don't want to make it so small that they look at it and use this as an example of maliciously compliant city, but I'm sure we could step it up in small pieces without going too over the top, just to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a bad situation mixed use wise. So any questions on that mixed use strategy?
I like where you added the water. That's, you guys must have talked about that before. I think it's an important thing.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I calculated an estimated water
You
use.
said what?
We'll revisit it.
Yeah.
And I know we don't want to be perceived as a maliciously compliant city, but I think we also recognize that we're going to have to keep doing this year after year after year. So we don't want to make too big of steps right now where we will keep feeling that pressure to make further steps in the future.
Agreed.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we can discuss the exact density bump. If our water situation is looking like it's an appropriate thing, and then we can talk numbers, but you're right. As of now, this is a yearly thing. So
Good.
if you solve all the issues now, it makes it tough in the future to continue to have a plan.
I just want to, there's got to be ways of, we're trying, every time we talk about moderate income, we immediately go to density.
Mhm.
And, are there other things that other cities or communities are doing where it doesn't? I mean, you can see clearly where this legislative stuff's coming from. It's coming from developers.
Right.
So, but what things are out there that doesn't tie moderate income to density?
Right. There were a few.
Is there anything?
There were a few primarily.
Not if we let developers keep making our laws.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. Most of them were tied in some way to density. There were a couple other things that were not as density related necessarily. So we've got infrastructure for moderate income housing. I mean, they don't specify density very often, but it's kind of what's implied. So rehabilitating uninhabitable housing stock, we don't have a lot of that. Using county general fund to waive construction fees, that's just lowering the fees on that. So we could look into that.
And that goes in line with, so why don't we do that for single family construction?
We could.
I mean, there's things like that. I just find it's really interesting that everything just, and I know why,
Right.
but why does it have to be density?
Yeah. Yeah. There are a couple things that in here that aren't tied to density. We could look at construction fees and waiving those. It does have an impact on different infrastructure.
Oh, I understand that.
As soon as we waive.
But we all
fees.
recognize there's costs of higher density.
Right. True.
So I just have a question. In North Logan, if not with the developer, if you have property and you want to build a home, what are the impact fees charged now?
Yeah. So it depends on a couple things. And we just barely did a study not that long ago. I think it was a year or two ago, where they calculated all the needs from the 5-year plans of the city for costs, and they based those impact fees on that. So we hadn't had impact fees raised for years and years up to that point. And we were severely behind, and we didn't have the funds to complete projects that needed expanding due to growth. That's what impact fees really are for. Widen roads, add water infrastructure, those things that come about because of growth. Impact fees are supposed to cover that. Growth pay for growth. We did get it updated. And I think because we were a little bit behind, our impact fees went from bare bones, lowest in the valley by far. Developers would ask us if we were sure that's what the fees were, or they would really quickly write out the check, to one of the higher ones in the valley. We're still not the highest, but one of the higher ones in the valley. All of our fees from the city, if you search North Logan City master fee schedule, you can pull them up. These building permit fees are, they're where you're going to see the impact fees. So your water meter fees based on size of water meter. You got your road impact fee for a single family is here. There's your water impact fee for a meter. I'm not sure what the total typically ends up being. I don't know if you've got a rough number, Alan.
They say 18 to 20.
Yeah.
Wow.
For the average home.
For the moderate home.
The average home about 18,000.
So speaking of moderate, and I mean, kind of related to this, is what about zoning and that has maximum square footage? I mean, all the things are always, I know a lot of this is covered by CC&Rs, but is there things like that other communities are doing to try and encourage,
Yeah.
1,200 square foot homes?
So as far as requiring max,
Well, I just wondered is there a zone out there that you look and you consider that has requirements around maximum square footage or
Of the lot or
Yeah.
of the dwelling?
of the dwelling?
house.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the problem. When you go when you start looking at lot size, then it becomes a density issue.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I'm just throwing this out there.
Yeah.
Unless they go to the microphone.
Oh, gavel.
Oh, what?
Perfect.
Please state your
Perfect.
name.
I'm just throwing stuff out there.
Yes, there we go, man.
You asked the key question. The reason it's so frustrating for North Logan, Alan Luce, city worker. The reason it's so frustrating for North Logan City is because when we look through this, and Spencer pointed this out in the workshop, so I'm preaching to the choir here. The reason it's so frustrating for North Logan City is because right now they're asking us, no matter where we are in this race, you could say it, like we're literally towards the end of a marathon and we're near the end, and they're asking us, but you have to just improve from wherever you're at right now. So you look at most of the other cities in the valley, and they literally can start from anywhere. They have little to no moderate income housing. They don't have any requirements. For them, it's simply, can you adopt an ADU ordinance that's already required by the state? But that's one of the things that they can do. Just looking through there, they can literally start at anything. For us, we have to be very strategic about going about this because we've already done all of these things. We already have a 30% of our city that qualifies as moderate or affordable housing. None of it's affordable, but just to clarify that again, we've already talked
We're not
about
saying
this.
that, they're saying moderate.
Moderate
Moderate
income.
income, but there's nothing
Which makes
affordable
nothing
in the
affordable.
entire city. That's
My
impossible.
son's looking for
Our
a house.
townhomes in the city center, which are very small in footprint and everything else, cost $350,000 to $380,000. That's not affordable in any way, shape, or form. Anywho, back off my soapbox though. But looking through these things, you have to be very strategic. And like Kenny said, when you go through these things, we can't go so far though that the next year we can't do something again because we're going to be mandated to do that. But looking at innovative ideas like Jeff brought up, that's the way you're going to have to do it, by looking at those, or simply it can't just be like we talked about adding 1 square foot to like an ADU, but maybe adding like 100 square feet or 150 square feet, which we already debated about when we were approving the ADU ordinance. But just knowing that the next year they're going to come back because of the issue we've got with the state legislature
I'm
right
just
now.
wondering what really moves the needle. This is all a farce in my opinion, because it's driven by developers lobbying the legislature. It has nothing to do with actually providing.
Or keep this in mind. At the last Utah League of Cities and Towns, they pointing out the statistic. I don't know what the previous statistic was. I think it was either flipped. It was like 60 to 70% of all state legislators had served on a planning commission, city council, or mayor position in a city.
Oh, so they all know.
Now it's
Now it's
20%.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
and the rest are developers.
20% are, and the rest are
Developers.
people coming in and they're serving there.
Padded by developers.
So I went into the pocket padding, but even at that point, so it really, like, the cities have to look at innovative ways here. And in a city like North Logan, that's, let's be honest, we've really looked into this in the past. I mean, we looked at it from just a planning stance for 20 years. And so doing these things, we have to be very careful in going about it. That's just my soapbox. So I just want to point that out as you go through this. Do look at the areas where we just basically fine tune the things we've already done.
Yeah.
Like the ADU ordinance, I'm sure it can be fine tuned to be a little bit better. I think it can be. The mixed use housing component, they're going to push that beyond belief at the state. Maybe we do modify some of those things in there. I think those are the low hanging fruit, but sorry, I just had to point that out.
Thank you, Alan.
No, I don't, yeah, I like the three. I mean, I thought it was useful at the workshop.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if there's things that really actually.
Yeah, I could dive through the other ones. The tough thing with this issue is I can't say I've been given or seen a good example of a location where supply and demand has caused housing prices to go up. People want to live in a place. I haven't seen anywhere that has solved it, honestly. There's a lot of cities before, a lot of places before Utah, before Cache Valley, before North Logan that had cheap, easy to find houses. A lot of people moved in, wanted to live there, and prices go up, and it's tough. So it is really hard to see or to feel like you're going to move the needle. But I'll look through some of the other ones that aren't density related as well, a little bit more in depth, and see if there's anything we can pull
I've
from
looked
there.
at them. I just, What about putting a sign here that says 22 more miles to Preston?
That could be an
I
option.
don't know.
We'll have to make up our own
It
goal for
is,
that
it
one.
is. I
Well,
mean, real
we
estate prices are significantly lower in Franklin County.
We can
So
have
I'm just-
welcome to North Logan, 22 miles to
Yeah.
Chris.
Moderate income housing, drive north 22 more minutes.
Oh, man. Yep.
Okay.
Or give us
Moving
10
on.
years, and if we get really aggressive with this, then we'll all be there.
That's-
Yeah. Here we
All
go.
right, moving right along.
The next one, the last one, allow for reduced regulations to internal detached accessory dwelling units. We don't have much else we can do with internal ADUs because we're already just at the state level, which is they're good to go everywhere, thumbs up. The thing we can change is detached accessory dwelling units and potentially just minor changes to help more people utilize detached units. One thing on our timeline that I put in here is in that first workshop. So in the workshop next time, and I'll try to make sure it doesn't take up the whole thing. I feel like our last few have been moderate income housing. We'll try to make this a little shorter so that we can talk about other issues, maybe some parks planning or something else, but maybe just showing the number of detached ADUs that were permitted through the past years that we've updated our code, say 3 years, and then going from there on those ADUs and trying to identify ways we can make it more accessible, whether that's size, whether that's setbacks. There may be a couple different things we can do process wise. There are a couple different requirements that are they kind of feel like red tape. Maybe we can look at a better way to streamline it. There has to be a notarized letter and some other things that maybe we can refine. So that's our last strategy. Probably not major changes, but minor ones to make things a little easier.
Good.
So, yep, that's it. If you like the way this draft looks, we have to get something passed by October. Obviously, that means it's got to be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission and then adopted by the City Council. So we've got some time, but I can get this typed up into more of a draft. And we could consider it one more time, maybe before a public hearing. And yeah, we've got time. If there's ever a really full agenda, I will push this off so that we're not staying too late, but.
And you have to report back to Workforce Services on at what frequency and when's the next one?
Once a year, October is when we yearly in October
Okay.
is when we'll report. So,
And we need this done by October, he said.
yep.
So,
So we'll
sounds
get this
good.
done and then I'll report to them from there. So used to be December, now it's October. So,
Great.
Maybe we could
Good.
report early and count that as a-
Yeah, that's right.
That's
We'll
one of our-
report to you in September.
One of our
That puts us
goals.
Higher on the priority list.
yep.
Okay, any other discussion, people? Let's move on to number 2. Spencer.
Okay, this one was another one that came up briefly at the workshop. I don't know why that word was eluding me there. Accessory buildings and sheds. So looking at our code on here, there are a couple different things that we may want to take a look at. Accessory buildings, not accessory dwelling units. I had that incorrect there, but just sheds, detached garages, things like that. I dug around to different cities in the valley and outside the valley on 3 different aspects of sheds, accessory buildings, size and setbacks and height were the 3 things that we have in our code that are regulated. Right now, the size of the accessory buildings combined, all accessory buildings together can't equal more than 25% of the rear yard. There's no limit on how big an individual building could be. So if you have a 6 acre, or let's go 8, it's easier math, 8 acre piece of land, you could have a 2 acre potentially shed footprint. So
Except that this is only the rear yard, it says, right? So.
yeah, so it wouldn't be quite like it would be less than that, but you could have a very large, there's no cap essentially, which honestly, we haven't had a large number of issues for. We have had a couple that have been extremely large accessory buildings that have gotten some angry emails and complaints from people on that.
I thought I remembered Alan saying that one of them, they ended up trying to run a business out of where they didn't have the licensing to do that. Is that right? Out of one of their,
So that sounds
Yeah.
like a different problem than size.
oh, they were renting it.
Essentially creating a quasi storage.
But isn't that covered by business license or conditional use?
Yeah, so that one,
To run a business?
that one would be covered in that front as well, but
So now we're just saying, oh, you just can't have a building.
no. No, I think the process, we're looking to decide if we have a cap or not on individual building size. As I looked through the other cities, there were some that had it. There was a lot of cities that had the same language. I think everybody must have written the code at the same time. This must be a really old piece of code. And people copied and pasted because there were a lot of 25% of the rear yard lines in there. Nibley had probably the most comprehensive, and theirs was based on lot size. So 0 to 14,000 square feet was 1,000 square foot shed maximum. Third acre to a half is 1,200 feet, and so on and so forth. Steps up. As soon as you get over an acre, it can be 5,000 square foot footprint of a shed, which is really, really large accessory building. I put in here the number of 3,000 just as the cap for a single building. I would leave it up to the planning commission as a discussion item to think. We don't want to write code just to write code. But if we're going to avoid a situation that we really don't want in the city, then I feel like we definitely could write some sort of an ordinance like this to cover us. What are the thoughts on this? Is this something you think we need or would like to pursue?
Well, besides illegally running a business, what other issues does we have that we're trying to fix?
Yeah, I think that having an extremely large accessory buildings probably has a large impact on neighborhoods and character of neighborhoods probably is the biggest.
But to do that, you've got to be, because we've already covered 25%. So you're in a zoned area that's an estate type zoning area that's going to have horse stables or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, do we really feel like it's a
that's the question. And nobody's come in and asked for a permit for an acre size building to this point. But really you'd only have to have one. So it does, yeah, it's just weighing what that impact would be. If you took, say, because there are some lots that are a lot bigger in smaller neighborhood areas that have, say, a large piece tied to it. Quarter of this, I mean, you could take and put a large structure here. Maybe that wouldn't be such a big impact. Maybe it's I mean, this is a really large rear yard right there. So you could put in a building that spans clear across and have an indoor tennis court pickleball and blocks every view for 4 houses across. I think that's probably the main concern. As soon as a shed gets over a certain size, and I don't know what that is, we get a lot of really angry calls when they start to go up. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to write code against it, but just trying to make our code a little tighter and having a definitive number can be helpful. But
I like the idea of having a definitive number. Then we have something we can work with.
well, but 25% is a definitive number.
Yeah, but not for the building.
The challenge
25%
is,
of the rear yard.
But it says no individual accessory building shall cover more than 3,000 square feet. So the building can't be any more than 3,000 square feet.
Yeah.
That makes more sense to me than shall cover more than 25% of the rear yard.
and the 25% is including all the buildings. So say they get a detached garage, a couple sheds, a shop, all of them put together can't go
So
over
I'm
that.
just gonna do 4 3,000 square foot buildings.
So yeah, then somebody, if they wanted to do
That's where I like the percentage thing, honestly, is that I'm trying to keep it as a ratio rather than trying to
of the
say,
size.
you know, because then I get away with it, just like I do my sheds now without getting a building permit. I just buy or I
200.
build a whole bunch of 200 square foot sheds, so
Yep.
I don't have to get a building permit.
Yep.
I guess the challenge that I'm struggling with in my head is, you know, in your example, Spencer, where you've got someone who wants to build a really big indoor pickleball basketball court in their backyard and it blocks their neighbor's view. If you prohibit them from doing that because it blocks their neighbor's view, you're limiting that person's freedoms in favor of their neighbor's view.
I mean, we're not restricting house sizes,
No. Nope.
so why
Long
would
as
we
there was the
restrict
infill.
their accessory building?
Yeah. Yeah, I
from
mean,
a-
that's
from a neighbor. That's, I mean, I've seen some pretty crazy looking houses that I'm glad maybe I don't live next to, but that's their right and their property.
yeah.
So, yeah, so I don't know where I fall on this either. And I guess like you already alluded to this, are we generating code that anticipating a problem that may never be a problem?
Yep,
Or
But
that's
if
true.
if
That's
it
always
does
the
become a
question.
problem, it's too late at that point. So,
Yeah, it is hard also to pick a number. So it's nice to have a number that I can say, hey, you got to keep it under X square feet. And I think people like that too, for the most part, when they're like,
Yeah.
okay, now I know, as opposed to
It's just-
25%.
It's just 3,000 just seems arbitrary.
That's the thing, is what do you pick? No matter what you pick, it's arbitrary, and somebody's probably going to come in with something 10 square feet over that it really doesn't make that big of a difference. But yeah, so
And
that's
does
the
that
only really
create
tricky.
problems? Because now on my 1/4 acre lot, I can use up every square footprint of my backyard because now I've the 25% thing doesn't matter.
I left the 25% in there, so that it couldn't, it would still apply.
so you
So-
can have both.
So you would, if
Just smaller.
your 25% is less than 3,000 square
Okay,
feet.
so 25% or a maximum of 3,000.
Yes.
square feet.
Yeah, so it would limit.
Yeah.
So if you have somebody in a really small lot, this wouldn't apply, so. And we can leave this off. We don't have to change it. I figured I'd bring it up. It's been raised in the past, so this discussion is helpful. When I come in as a draft, seems like not sold on having a set number. And honestly, I was expecting to see a set number in everybody else's code. And I didn't. I saw 25% in almost everybody's. I think that's a product of everybody copying from the same starting
Oh, I'm
code when
sure.
they wrote it, when the cities were
Mm.
founded.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of them were the same 25% type of language.
I just have a hard time with, as the king saying you can't build.
Right. Yep.
But I'm gonna let you build whatever crazy house you want that fits within the setbacks.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, you get around this by, I'll just build my 4,000 foot garage and attach it.
Yeah. If you attach it, then you're, as long as you're in the
Right.
setback.
So where are we to say then that I can't build a 3,000 square or a 3,500 square foot detached garage? If I have the place, then I just connect the wall. It just doesn't make sense that we would be meddling in that.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah. And this isn't a draft. This is just discussion. This is exactly what I need to get this written as well. So then the next, and anything else on the size? Okay. The next thing is the height. So I looked through the height that people allow in here. A lot of cities cap it at 15 is Logan, 15 feet high. Smithfield is 20 feet high, and no taller than the house
For accessory buildings?
for accessory buildings.
But most residential homes are 35. or
35.
32.
35 is our code and most code.
Interesting.
Providence is
Same thing,
15
you
in
just
some
add it
residential
on your
zones.
garage.
Yeah. 15 and then 35 in some. Mendon 24. It's kind of all this range. A lot of cities sit at 15, some sit at 35. We're currently at 35. I don't know. I don't know if there's a reason to limit it to 15. That makes it be required to be a single story building. And I don't know that that's necessary. We've had a few accessory buildings come in that are 2 stories, and I don't see an issue with them. Having a limit to say it can't be any taller than the main building would potentially be useful in just like a neighborhood character sort of thing.
That does make
So
sense.
I like that.
I added that in.
So
That's a good
that highlighted sentence is not part of the code right now. You
Yeah,
added that.
anything
Okay.
highlighted in is stuff that I'm adding. The rest of it is existing. So I wanted to get thoughts on that. And if there's a desire to switch that to 15, we can. Like I said, I don't see a reason to limit that necessarily.
I don't either, because
You just add the
You-
building onto your house and you get around it. So
I like this. No,
Yeah,
I like.
but I
this
do
no
like
greater
having
than the main
that.
building.
stating.
Yeah.
Because we outline that for the residential building.
Yep.
The maximum height.
Yep. And
So
I
let's
checked
just
that with
keep
building
the same
permits.
For your.
Yep.
So as it is today, there is no height restriction. So someone can build
On an
50
accessory.
foot Yeah, so 50-foot
But there
tall
is on a
shed.
home.
No, there's
Oh,
a
on the-
35,
okay,
there's a
35.
35-foot limit on accessory buildings.
Okay.
So, yeah, no accessory building is higher than 35 feet, no main building. When building permits come into, I do check that. It goes to the midpoint of the pitch of the roof. But houses, sheds, both 35 feet, which is a lot. Whenever I tell somebody that, they're like, oh, okay, guess I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, again, we haven't had a significant concern about it so far. I could add this, we could look at adding this in. The other thing, they're not big changes as far as code goes, but it would be changes to process. So it's kind of easy to scroll through this, but the next one is setbacks. So the setbacks, this language, I went through the other cities' code as well. And this is another one of those things I think was adopted right at the beginning. The title of the modifying regulations, all that is the same name. Same with the area of accessory buildings. I do think this was all adopted by most cities in the valley right at the start. But as soon as you get past 10 feet behind the home, you can have a side yard of 6 feet instead of the minimum of whatever the primary structure setback is, or 20 feet is that setback unless you're 10 feet behind the home. So this code change, and this is something that's been raised, my interpretation of 10 feet behind the home for a while on these permits, and I think for a little bit before me, just judging by some buildings I've seen around, was if it's 10 feet behind the front face of the home, that would be 10 feet behind the home. So it's set back an additional 10 feet. Then that setback comes into play. We did get some clarification on that. The way the code is written, it's got to be 10 feet all the way behind the home into the backyard. So this change would make that so it was 10 feet, setback 10 feet further than the home from the street, if that makes sense. That would allow people to utilize their side yards potentially a little more. I'll scroll into a random, we'll just use the city office, I guess. So if this was a front setback here, the current code says you can only go to 6 foot on your setbacks if you're 10 feet behind this point from the road. Then you could go to 6 feet and put a shed back here. Under the change, it would just be you'd have to be 10 feet back from this setback. So if you were right here, you could go to 6 feet on this side property line. So typically that allows people to get in a detached garage on the side of their house in some cases, as opposed to needing to put it in the back. Typically for sheds, I see people put those in the backyard fully, but detached garages, I think is what it is. So we don't have to make that change. Like I said, most people just have this same 10 feet behind the house entirely, but wanted to discuss it.
So what's the purpose of having side setbacks that we require on homes?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ones. Obviously, to keep the homes far enough apart where people are living. If this was an ADU, if people were living above the garage, they'd still have to meet the primary home setbacks. And typically, this 6 feet, just to give a little context, is going to be giving you about 4 feet in the average R112, because the minimum is 10. So it's going to give you 4 extra feet, or in our acre zoning, it's going to give you an extra 9. Because the minimum setback is 15. So with it being an accessory building and doesn't have anybody living there, that might be the reasoning behind letting it get a little bit closer, because you don't have anybody, say, sleeping in there looking through a window, or maybe just in there in a shop, parking in a garage, not as big of an impact. But you could also put that in the backyard too, so it's not lined up directly with the house. So kind of minor considerations, but
Yeah, I mean, the trouble I have with it, and I have trouble with this because we've discussed this at length, is that the point of having side setbacks, we're eliminating the point of having side setbacks when we just simply let them put an accessory dwelling now within 6 feet of the fence or side yard. And so then so what is it? Do we just eliminate all of our side setback requirements? I mean, there's a lot of reasons. There's safety, there's fire reasons. There's a lot of reasons, and it's not just 10 feet. It's most of our zoned areas, with the exception of down here, it's a combination of 25 feet between the two. So you're
right.
A minimum of 10, yes, but you would have a 12 and a 13 or a 12 and a half and a 12 and a half. And so, but now all of a sudden, if we just say, well, we take the furthest most front part and we say 10 feet back from that, what's the point of having side setbacks now? And that's the trouble that I have with that interpretation,
Right.
is that, well, if that's the case, then we need to go and adjust all of our setbacks and be consistent if it's that way.
Right. Yeah, no, and the thing I've heard on it, and again, I can definitely see that a lot of the other cities, I haven't seen any city have this type of language. So I think we would be kind of one of the earlier ones. I think one thing I've heard from people on kind of both sides is as soon as people are living in there. So when we were talking the ADUs used to only have the same setbacks as any other accessory building. So that's when you've got an accessory dwelling unit and people are living in there full time. That was one thing that was raised as a concern with several ADUs that were permitted was, okay, this isn't just a shed. This isn't just a garage with a car parked on it. This is somebody living right there within 6 feet of the property boundary. And I'm right, like it's just really close. So with it being just for accessory buildings and not applying to ADUs, that's the one thing where I could still see we're still upholding those setbacks. We don't have dwelling right next to
But
people.
what does living in
but-
it have to do with the structure being 6 feet from the property line?
Yeah, and as far as the setbacks on the structure too, so a shed, it's just as long as it's in the backyard, it can be closer.
6
So
feet.
yeah, it can be 6 feet as long as it's in the backyard. So the setbacks still go to 6 feet at some point. It's just allowing them to go to 6 feet a little bit earlier. I could see it going either way on this one. I can't say I'm too attached. I like to interpret code, and I think the reason I interpreted it that way before is I like to interpret it on the side of letting people use their property to do things, and it did
While I
allow for
agree with that, then let's change the side setbacks altogether.
right. Yeah, and it did allow a few people to get a detached garage in where they couldn't if they had to put it all the way in the back.
Yeah.
But
I just think it creates, so, I mean, the one
Right.
that you and I talked about a year ago, I think that looks hideous. You can't even access their main garage because it comes in from the side, because we've allowed that accessory barn now, right up there. To me, and as if that was in my neighborhood, yet I've got all these CC&Rs and I've got all this stuff, but then we allow the pole barn to come in and be 6 feet from the yard, the property sideline. And that's where my concern is, regardless of somebody's living in it or not. I think we're not following what the guidelines and those things that we've done in our planning. And that's why we have, in my opinion, why we have setbacks. It's why, we have a 30-foot setback in the front for a reason, right? We like to see a yard or something like that. That's where I come from with it.
Yeah.
And and the only reason I'm sensitive to this because I was denied a building permit once, not in North Logan, but in another town because of this.
yeah,
And I understand it, but I think if we're going one way and we want people to be able to utilize their yards, then we need to look at a lot of code.
yeah,
I like the open space, the rural fill. And so that's why I'm supportive of the 10 feet behind the building. Then build your barns and sheds and that sort of thing. I struggle with, we have setbacks on a residential home, but if you want to do a detached pole barn or whatever, then you just got to be back 10 feet and then you can be right up, 6 feet from the property line. I just think we've missed the intent of what the other codes are by doing that. Yeah, just my opinion.
So let's read it again, Spencer.
yeah. So this one is just 10 feet behind the front face. And honestly, if this stays out, so if we have it right now, if we have anything come in, we're interpreting it as 10 feet behind the whole house at this point.
Back end of the house.
Yeah, 10 feet behind the whole house.
I've read code that states specifically that the rearmost part or something to that. It was very clear. We tried to build in a jog and they had a big covered deck area.
Uh-huh.
And the interpretation in that city is it was behind that attached covered deck. 10
Yeah.
feet went.
And we could specify that it gets, it gets tough a little bit on interpretation. Typically what will
Well,
happen,
I'm just suggesting that whatever way we go, we really ought to be pretty clear.
clarify it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's not the highlighted text here, replace that with something that says the
Well,
rearmost
the
part of the
rearmost part of
building.
the building or whatever. I don't know. I can't remember where I read that, but
that's clearer for me to understand than what it is right here.
Behind the front face. Yeah. And if it's not behind the front face, most of the time, this isn't going to mean somebody can't do a project at all. It's most of the time going to mean that they push it backwards, which means it's less visible from the road.
which
So,
is what a lot
Which
of
is okay.
CCNRs and developments
Right.
want, because they want that
yeah.
residential feel.
Yep. So we
Not
could
the
change
full
that,
line.
clarify it, say behind the furthest point of the house, or we could say, or we can leave it the same. And just continue to interpret the way that's kind of been clarified to us now. We got a quick legal opinion on that one. So it would be
Well, but I want to
entirely
hear you
behind.
guys too.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm only
what-
passionate about it because Spencer and I argued about it.
I can see both perspectives, but so what you're saying, Jeff, is we have many other parts of the code that already say,
Well, our residential code requires minimum setback on the front, minimum side yard setbacks.
For the
Which
home,
is-
than 6
for the
feet.
home.
For the home, for
Which
the
is-
residential.
And then the
Which-
other buildings have a separate one. That's the accessory buildings. We're talking
Yeah,
about.
And most of the typical ones, it's 25 feet is your side setback, 10 being the minimum, 25 being the combination of the two. It's changes when you're on a corner too.
Mhm.
But that's the typical. And so what I'm saying is if we're doing it here, we're saying, well, the side setback doesn't matter as much, or doesn't matter, only the first 10 feet of the residential structure. And then we can build pulled irons or whatever, shops, detached garages that look like the house. I'm not just picking on the one, but
well, so the
As
way I
long-
read this right now, though, it makes it sound like it does have to be 10 feet behind. Without that highlighted section, I would read that as it's already got to be behind the rearmost part of the main building. But
Yep.
you're saying that we have made exceptions to that already.
I interpreted it the other way. Behind the house
Okay.
was
All right.
behind the
Okay.
front. That's how I was interpreting.
Okay,
We did get clarification that entirely behind the house was the way it was intended.
okay. yeah.
So
And I guess
from
it is
here on,
ambiguous right now, which is why we're talking about
Yep.
this.
So you'll see, and I don't think I was the only one, just again, looking at the buildings that were approved before I got here as well. That's just kind of how it has been interpreted. We could clarify that language just to make sure it doesn't get misinterpreted again. And if we did say just behind,
yeah,
rearmost
at a
part of the
minimum, I
house.
think we do need to make
I
a
think
change.
just
we-
clarify it.
Just
For a layperson like me, it makes more sense to clarify it.
Yeah. And it'd be a quick little line of code. We could update it.
So I do agree with you, like, I kind of agree with the general philosophy of letting people do what give them as much liberty as possible to do what they want to on their land, but Jeff brings up a good point. If everyone had detached garages within 6 feet of their property boundaries, that could get kind of unwieldy.
That does reduces the distance between buildings drastically. If on two sides, say you go from that 10 or 15 foot minimum, say the minimum's both on the same side, you drop that down, you're moving everything 8 feet closer. Things would feel a lot tighter if everybody adopted it. It's not a concern that everybody's going to go out and build these tomorrow. We get a handful every year, but there are options. So if we don't change it to make it so it's from the front, it's not like we're removing all possibilities from them. They can push it into the backyard, be 10 feet behind the house, or sometimes they opt to just do an addition to their home and expand. A lot of
Oh,
times
yeah.
it's garage space they're looking for anyway. They'll add on a garage to their home. Then they can go within 10 or 15 feet anyway. Whereas to get within 6, you had to have a 10-foot gap between the building and the detached building anyway. So they don't end up losing necessarily that much space. It's typically a workaround. There've only been one or two cases where it would have killed the project entirely that I can think of. So it's not going to be overly oppressive. And most other cities are doing it like this. Obviously, they caught Jeff's building he was trying to sneak through, shadily, no doubt. So,
And I'm like, but Alan said I could.
and that's it.
I just think we just need to be consistent.
Yeah,
So if the setback code, is there for a reason, I think, and that's where I bought into it, in my experience, is that, hey, the setback code's there for a reason, and it's everywhere. And it protects, there's a fire part of it. There is the aesthetics of a neighborhood, and that's why we have the setbacks where we do. Because I know there is some zoning down here, the zoning is a little bit different to where they can have, shorter
Mhm.
side setbacks, but we just need to be consistent.
Yeah.
And that's the concern that I had, was we weren't consistent in that,
Yeah.
if we interpret it that way.
Yeah, sounds good. Yep,
Okay.
that's it
But
on
again,
accessory buildings.
That makes sense to me.
I can get this worked up as a draft. Sounds like we're leery on the square foot size. I may keep some square foot measure. I may do a little more digging on maybe I'll go further outside the valley to see if anybody started from a different template than we did, different boilerplate. I may leave it in there just for when Heather and Heron get back as a talking point, but it sounds like we're probably shying away from having a general size cap. And then the height no greater than the main building, and the setbacks just clarifying to all the way behind the point. I can get that in a draft. So I'll probably bring it to Planning Commission one more time before we schedule a
Dude.
public hearing, just so we can get some more feedback too. But
Because I'm still thinking about the 3,000 square feet thing too.
okay,
So-
I'll keep something like that in. And again, I'll look and see if I can get outside of our boilerplate area to find
Okay.
some different language.
Is Dwight
Sounds
still
good.
on the commission too?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just,
Marie just doesn't put up the name tag. If they
Oh,
email and
okay.
say they're not going to make
Gotcha.
it, Marie will keep their name tag back. So
okay.
Great.
she'll shift everybody over.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
So if you don't show up and your name's here, naughty.
You dropped the ball.
You were
Thank
prior
you.
excused.
Okay, thank you, Spencer.
Yep.
Any more staff business discussion?
A couple little minor things here. Water, just wanted to give an update. I don't know if anybody saw water restrictions go out. I don't know if you're outside of the canal irrigation zone, but the city water restrictions are to 2 days a week, and that's based on your house number. That's exterior watering if you're on a city irrigation, if you're using that to irrigate your yard, which I don't know if anybody on the planning commission is, but if anybody asks you, you can direct them
2
to
days a week?
the city office, Zach, water department, John Mills, or just any of the receptionists. They'll be able to point them to the right day of week. So our water system, as far as wells and recharge, the rain has been great. Demand is down. That's helped everything stretch. It's fantastic. The water from the rain doesn't get down to our wells where we pull it from the ground for 2 years typically. So it doesn't make a big impact on the middle of summer and us pumping and using demand, but it has been extremely helpful to delay the start of everybody watering. And it has, people have been relatively good for that. Just a side note, if people are asking about the water, upset about the water, we do have a water source ground collection we collect from Water Canyon, up Green Canyon. That actually stopped running for the first time in 100 years on Thanksgiving last year. And there's a flow that's low enough that we're not able to treat or even use that. So we have a water source we're not able to use right now. So 2 days a week probably seems drastic, but it's in line with the canal companies, and we need to buckle down ahead of time and not get behind in this one. So
Spencer, I know we have the 2-day restriction. Do we restrict how many hours on those days people can water?
It's a free.
Okay.
Up there, whether they're addressed as otter even, and certain days when they can do that, depending on that. And our water restrictions and more information is actually on the website. And if you need to know, we also put it on the back of our.
Yeah.
But it is online, so I'm gonna be putting it on social media as well.
Yep.
Just the restriction. Because it is 2 days, but it's certain days that they can water depending on what.
Website.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just pull it up now. Yeah.
When they can do it, depending on their address. And certain days.
Yeah. How do we, what kind of enforcement options do we have on that?
So as far as enforcement, that makes it tough for hours. You're limited to, a
Yeah,
certain-
right, yeah.
but because it's tough to, so nobody's going out and chalk marking the sprinklers. I don't know how
Yeah,
you even do
right.
it. But if people are watering on the wrong day and our guys are out and see that, they'll put a door hanger on there, or just information, say, hey, warning, essentially. If it gets to the point where there've been enough warnings, and it's repeated and deliberate, and we only had, I think, one fine or maybe no fines last year, they will fine,
Okay.
them, but they'll start with just copious amounts of warnings.
So we've got, our
So-
water guys are taking out part of their day to actually go
Yep.
attempt to.
They don't have anything else to do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay,
Wow.
yeah.
This stuff.
So, so if we quit building houses, then we wouldn't have to do
Yeah,
that,
so at what
right?
point is that the mature thing to do though? No, but no, let's be honest about that. Why isn't it? So I've got a field up here that pulls water from the canal. That's soon gonna pull water from the primary water system. So why does that not stop the problem?
People ask me that all the time.
Well, I got 130 homes coming in right here that right now doesn't use any of our residential culinary, sorry.
Depends on where you're at in the city.
Oh, I recognize that, but it,
But number two, that one, the time we build a home. We start subdivision now, we 2 or 3 months before they.
yeah, I recognize that. That's not the question that I asked. I said, what point do we say we're in trouble? Because what I'm fearing, this is the first time I heard our water source is dry. We just keep telling people, come on in, keep building. At what point do we recognize that we have to do something different?
Probably pretty soon, but right now, the well will be built for first home.
Okay. I'm
But
just asking the question. It just,
Yeah.
it's funny to me that we don't ever stop anything, or we don't question it, or we don't reporting on it when we talk about development and subdivisions, but then it's our water source for the first time in 100 years dried up.
Right. And just to know, we
And
have a
so
lot of,
I'm trying to understand, when does it, when it's too late?
no,
So
yeah.
once we drill that well, once we drill it, we'll know exactly how much is coming through. That well will be online when the first home is built. So right now, we grew, yes, the 110,
Mhm,
but the other homes for you,
mhm.
all on secondary.
Yeah.
Home use 4,000.
Right, but there's still a culinary use that we're not supplying now.
I mean, the model has said that, yes, we can, it's still really extremely tight with our existing system. So we can't technically put a moratorium on it, it's still extremely dry that water. But it's already reached that point where we either do a moratorium soon. That's the thing. Or
Okay.
just wait and see what that well produces. Because at that point, we have a well, right after that, we have 2 reservoirs coming out. So we'll have both of those in by next year, next fall. Already got a bid on that contract, that's gonna start this fall. That, we're right now a transformer for a subdivision. These things are all in account, each transformer. Someone can get one of those, is a year from now. So even if they put in the infrastructure, subdivision out here, they're really thinking start next spring.
So my question is, just because people ask me this all the time.
Yeah.
My question is, we say, we're digging the well, we've got the reservoirs, we can't do a moratorium because all this is going to happen and we're going to have all this water. We don't know what water we're going to have, even until the well's built and we see, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, we will have a reservoir, so no matter what, we'll have a reservoir.
if we have rain and snow, then we'll have water in the reservoir.
Well, no, you
To-
can fill up the reservoir with our existing system.
Okay. But that's what people
Yeah.
keep saying.
Yeah, I can,
Where's it coming from? What's happening? So,
right.
so we can't put a moratorium on building because we're going to have all this stuff and hopefully it's going to take care of it, but we don't know. Is that what we're
Yeah.
saying?
No, so here's the breakdown, just to give it a little bit of context. So first off, the water sources, I mentioned that water source. It's not our only water source. It typically tapers off near the end of the year, and we hit a point every year where it's a low enough flow we can't use it. But this last year is when it actually stopped. It did come back. It's at a low enough flow we can't use it right now. So we have other sources we'll cover. We've got other wells, just to hit that before, because that's an urgent thing. To go to your question, Nan, moratoriums are a very high impact to property rights and other things. It's the highest that we could do as a city to say, hey, yeah, you can't do anything with this right now. So there's essentially a list of things that we do when we have a water shortage, and we're working our way down that list. The biggest impact we can make right now, even more than a moratorium on Smiling H or a moratorium on some other things, that is going to use 4,000 gallons per house. A bigger impact is we have some institutional users that are using 8 million gallons a month right now. And we've already had sit-down meetings with the heads of those institutions and are basically giving them ultimatums and saying, hey, your usage is extreme and you need to cut back, which will make a bigger difference than any sort of subdivision thing we can. So
Are
we
those
don't want to
agricultural?
You gotta quit flushing the.
So
toilet
that's
down
good.
the lab.
That's
No.
good
Is
to
that
know.
agricultural institutions or actually like?
Agricultural's all
That's
secondary,
SEO.
so we don't see a lot of that use in our city system, but big buildings, large institutional buildings that don't really have much incentive to reset their clocks and use a lot of irrigation water, they have the money to pay it.
Yeah,
Those
who
are the
drove
ones
down
where,
14th on Monday?
yeah,
We got all that rain and
Yeah.
USU is watering every lawn on 14th East.
the
or
Space
14th
Dynamics
North.
Lab is a big
Yeah, same
user.
way.
We're talking with them right now. And
Well,
they're being
sensor
willing.
technology is really new to the lab, so just give them some time.
They're willing to work with us, but you've got big
We don't know-
humidifiers,
we
you
don't
got
know
cooling
what's
towers, you got things like that. So those are the things we go to first before we
Okay.
do something as high of impact. If, say, the well doesn't produce as much as we thought, if we get to a point where we can't reduce anymore and we keep hitting that, moratorium will come right up on the table. It's just one of those things we don't want to pull up and slap down for. It seems like an easy thing of like, let me continue to water as much as I want, let everything stay the
Well.
same and just don't open the door anymore. But you got to remember the property owners who've owned that land for hundreds of years, say they're looking to, it's just a very high impact thing. Whereas going to institutions, going to high water users in residential is something we can do right up front. That said, having 2 days of water 2 days a week at the beginning of June is also not tenable
in
for all of our city, right? And we know that, which is why we're putting in infrastructure like wells, like the concrete water reservoirs to not have to do this anymore. So
Actually,
we're
And
walking
this
a
is-
fine line though.
I think
this
2
is-
days a
oh,
week.
sorry.
Oh, sorry,
Sorry.
Nan, go ahead.
I would say, and these are people who are okay with I mean, as okay as we are with the restrictions. I
Right.
mean, they're not saying, I want to water constantly. They're saying, okay, but when does it stop? Or
Yep.
what do we do?
That's what
So
I'm
it's
worried
nice to know
about
that
is-
information that I can
Yeah.
pass on. Because I say, I don't know, you
Yeah.
know, we're digging a well. It's going to be done in a year. Oh,
So
and we know that. Yeah.
that was one of the things I was gonna say. Well, so first of all, I was gonna say, I feel like telling people to water no more than 2 days a week is actually perfectly tenable. Like grass can support that without dying still, first of all. I've only watered my lawn 2 days a week for years and years. And it's worked fine, but
Come past the house sometime. I'll show you a nice.
the other
Hey.
question the other thing, so I have secondary water shares And on dry years like this, sometimes it just doesn't go the distance. So so they'll cut it off in like August or something just because the water's not available. So in our modeling, how do we model contingencies like that where all of a sudden you get a spike on culinary usage because the secondary water gets shut off?
It's coming.
It's coming, I know,
So if your water has.
which is crazy.
to it, shares, the subdivision model only use secondary. If they switch over to culinary, it's gonna become a
Oh, so
It's right there in this one. Yeah,
Wouldn't
so
they
you
go on
can't
secondary?
switch over because we can't
just use
plan for that
culinary?
sort of a
okay,
spike.
gotcha.
It's,
Okay.
it's impossible on a city system to be able to be prepared for that.
Yeah, okay.
So you just can't use culinary water on it.
So I guess I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I would probably put a hose up to my culinary water spigot outside and try to at least keep my grass alive, if not still brown, but alive. That would not be allowed. Okay. Good to know. If you.
That, well, we do have friends in Layton who've been on 1 day watering since April. They're on the Weber River, whatever it's called, and they've been on that restriction. Pardon me?
Secondary or city water?
I think it's secondary, but 1 day. Then that started in April.
Wow.
So
Yeah, no,
So we're-
and we'll continue to monitor it. Moratoriums are not off the table. We just want to use that later, but yeah, if pass that word on to people, if anybody's really needs to have I'm happy to sit down with anybody and discuss it. I get it. So
Let people know, though, let them know very blunt that the city's not going to do something that puts us. The guys are working 24 hours a day on the water system, they're not gonna allow something to come in. But if they're monitoring that, the reason they know that and the reason that these subdivisions have been allowed to come in, we won't have a home for them. And at that time, if we are in the same situation, it's going to be.
really, if we're in the same situation next year and they're ready to build, the city says, nope, no more building. After they've put all the infrastructure in and everything.
Other places have done it.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. I like that information because
helpful.
it is a concern. It is a concern for our citizens.
Yep.
And people want to know what to do about it. Well, I mean, sort of a bunch of nutcos out there, but off the record.
Yep.
But it's good to have that information out.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we'll keep you up to date with this. It comes up every meeting, which is how it should be. It's one of the most important topics right now. So as far as other staff business, as long as there's nothing else on the waterfront, just a note, the draft budget for the city was approved by the city council. Well, it wasn't approved. It was had a public hearing at the city council meeting last night. And that was part of it discussed as well. So if you have any questions on that, there are specifics and details. Alan's got numbers and different things there that he can go over with you. If you have anybody concerned or whatnot, let us, you can send them our way and go for more details, but just to keep you in the loop on that timing. Nothing's been approved. It won't be finalized and approved till clear into August. But those conversations are being had. At City Council's more involved with the budget than the Planning Commission, but I figured I'd mention it in case anybody was just interested to look through, and I'd be happy to let you give you some insights on it and let you take a look through that if you feel so inclined. So
Good. Any, that it?
and that's it. That's all I have unless you have anything
Let's wrap
else.
this
Alan.
thing up.
Yeah.
Kind of went into overtime. Good discussion.
Oh, yeah.
City council folder, reports and everything. You can email it to them. If they can.
No wonder they make so much money.
Okay.
There's
I
city
did tell-
events coming
I don't
up.
have it in me for a city council meeting.
Anyway, okay.
I can send this
They pay a
all to
lot,
you.
too.
This list of events.
Say, I heard you whisper.
I said that I looked at Smithfield City Planning Commissioners. I had to see a list of who they were. They only meet once a month.
One thing, that I'm thinking about that, one thing that I tried to build into the budget, when I talked with a lot of the other cities, I said, what do you pay your city council, what do you pay your planning commissioner? All, I mean, from everywhere, they're basically all.
From $500 a month.
And so we look through that, everyone does something different. We asked the city council members, this question, the same way, I said, what's a fair policy? Because what I did is, the city council won't vote or raise it for themselves, like they just won't even propose it. So I put it in, I just said, this is what a lot of other cities are doing, and it's very small. The city council, the proposed increase would be, if the city staff get raises at a certain level, then the city council can get raised, but only up to like a 3 or 4%. What I kind of proposed. Planning commission is a little bit different. Percentage increase by actually consulting.
A 1%.
Percentage of very little is very little. So.
We're not complaining.
Go buy soda.
We should probably
Just end this comment, and that's a good enough raise.
But the city councilor brought up a good point. They said, there's a question of pay. Because you don't just do your work in the meetings, you talk with your neighbors, talk with people you're planning constantly. And so there's an element of, even if you don't attend meetings. Just looking, I'll look at what a few of the cities are doing. I have to have that done in 2 weeks ago. I'm looking at that. So if you have comments on that or questions, let me know. Because we do need to do something.
Well, thanks, Alan. We didn't even think
My
about
kids are
that.
gonna
So
eat this month.
now we can think about it. Great.
I'll give it a 5 bucks.
Dom,
I'm gonna build that outbuilding up
Little
next to my
Caesar.
house now.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Spencer?
That's it. That's all I got.
Next meeting in 2 weeks, right?
Next meeting is in 2 weeks. Yep.
Okay. I guess we need a motion to adjourn.
Oh,
I move to adjourn the
Second it.
meeting.
Been moved and seconded.
Done.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
we didn't even let Spencer tell us what's coming up. But I looked at it.
There you go. I can pass this on to everybody.